Pan found John Milton in darkness that had nothing to do with night. The poet sat at his writing desk, sightless eyes turned toward the window as his daughter read back the morning's dictation. Paradise Lost was taking shape. Hell's geography spreading across pages in blind man's vision, made tangible through another's hand. "The capital needs a name," Milton muttered, waving his daughter away. "Satan's seat of power, the great city built in defiance of heaven. What do you call the architecture of rebellion?" Pan leaned close, invisible, and whispered in languages that predated language. He didn't speak English, didn't need to. Ideas bypassed words entirely, planting themselves in Milton's mind as if they'd always been there. The poet's blindness helped. Without sight to anchor him in the mundane world, he was more receptive to voices from spaces between things. "Pandemonium," Milton breathed, and Pan grinned at hearing his own name reconstructed, reinterpreted, made new, the place of all demons. But the poet didn't understand what he'd named. Thought he was imagining Satan's stronghold, a fixed location in cosmic geography. Thought the capital of hell was a place you could point to, walk through, lay siege to. He was writing theology, building metaphor, creating allegory to explain the origin of evil. Pan knew better. Pandemonium wasn't a city, it was a condition, wasn't a place. It was what happened when order finally admitted it had always been pretense. The capital of hell wasn't where demons lived. It was what emerged when enough of them gathered, when chaos achieved critical mass and structured itself into something that looked like civilization, but hungered like wild. "Built in an hour," Milton dictated, voice gaining confidence as inspiration struck. His daughter's pen scratched across paper. Suddenly stood, the fabric huge, rose like an exhalation. Pan watched the words take form, amused by their accuracy despite Milton's misunderstanding. Yes, Pandemonium did rise suddenly, not because demons were efficient architects, but because chaos didn't build gradually. It erupted, emerged, crystallized from disorder into new patterns that mimicked order, while serving entirely different purposes. "With frequent hands the work was pilled," Milton continued, describing demons laboring like industrious bees. He saw cooperation, organization, purposeful construction. Pan saw what he'd always seen: wild things wearing civilization's mask, chaos performing order's rituals, the primitive dressed in architecture's clothing. Milton thought he was warning Christians about Satan's power. He was actually encoding the secret truth that every city, every empire, every human attempt at order was just pandemonium with better interior design. "The name," Milton said, savoring it. "Pandemonium. All the demons gathered in council." Close enough, Pan thought. Let the poet believe he'd invented the word, had divined it from classical roots and Christian theology. Let him think he was describing hell's capital instead of every parliament, every court, every place humans gathered to make laws and pretend they'd transcended their nature. Milton would die believing he'd written a Christian epic about the fall of man and the necessity of divine grace. His poem would be studied for centuries as theology, as literature, as cultural artifact. And through all of it, buried in the text like a seed waiting to germinate, would be Pan's name, reborn as the place where chaos wore its crown, where the wild pretended to be tame, where demons gathered to play at civilization. Pandemonium, the capital of everywhere humans thought they'd banished him. Pan left the poet to his dictation, grinning. Milton couldn't see him leave, of course, but then he'd never seen him arrive either. Virgil didn't know Pan walked beside them through the darkening wood. The Roman poet, dead for centuries, served as Dante's guide through hell's geography. But who, Pan wondered with amusement, was guiding the guide? "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," Virgil intoned as they passed Hell's Gate, and Pan grinned. Hope was the first thing you abandoned in the wild too. Trees didn't hope, rivers didn't hope. Nature simply was indifferent to human wishes, and hell was just nature stripped of civilization's comforting lies. Through the first circle they descended, past virtuous pagans who'd never known Christ. Pan studied Dante's face as the poet observed these noble souls in their painless but hopeless eternity. The Italian understood hell as moral geography, sins mapped spatially, punishments calibrated to crimes, justice made architecture. Pan understood differently. Every circle was just another face of chaos wearing order's mask. The lustful, swept by eternal winds. That was just desire unchained from social constraint, passion revealed as storm. The gluttonous lying in freezing rain and mud, appetite without restraint, consumption become putrefaction. The wrathful, fighting in the Styx's black water, rage stripped of civilization's mediating rituals. Dante thought he was documenting divine justice. He was actually mapping what humans became when structure fell away, when the wild reclaimed what civilization pretended to have conquered. Pan whispered as they descended, and though Dante heard nothing distinct, ideas flowered in the poet's mind like dark blooms. The violence in Circle 7 wasn't punishment. It was just violence finally able to express itself without law's interference. The fraud in Circle 8 wasn't unnatural cunning. It was survival strategy older than humanity. Predators' camouflage applied to social interaction. In the deepest pit, they found Lucifer frozen in ice, 3 faces weeping, wings beating futilely. Dante saw the ultimate rebel, the fallen angel punished for prideful defiance. Pan saw something more personal, saw himself almost, or what humans needed to believe he was. The wild transformed into evil, nature reframed as rebellion, chaos made comprehensible by giving it intentionality, purpose, moral dimension. "This is the center," Virgil announced, "the lowest point, where all weight bears down, where the worst sins receive eternal justice." But Pan understood what Dante couldn't articulate. Hell and the wild were the same country. Both existed outside human order, both operated by rules that predated morality. Both stripped away the comfortable fictions that made civilization feel permanent, necessary, divinely ordained. The genius of Dante's vision was making hell structured, categorized, navigable, giving chaos a map, transforming the terrifying randomness of nature into a moral universe where suffering had reason, where punishment fit crime, where everything made sense according to divine logic. It was the most sophisticated lie Pan had ever witnessed, and the most useful. Because by encoding chaos as structured punishment, by making hell an ordered place, Dante had inadvertently taught humans to believe their own civilizations were fundamentally different from the darkness below. Hell was the exception. Orderly reality was the rule. Pan knew better. Watched as they climbed back toward the living world, Dante's mind already organizing his visions into perfect terza rima. The poet would write his comedy, and it would endure for centuries as Christianity's most powerful vision of the afterlife. And through every canto, buried in every circle's careful construction, would be the truth Dante had touched without recognizing, that hell wasn't below civilization, wasn't punishment for breaking its rules. Hell was what civilization had always been, just wild chaos performing order's rituals, predation dressed in justice's robes, pandemonium calling itself paradise, and genuinely believing the lie. Dante would surface convinced he'd seen divine truth. Pan stayed in the circles, patient as stone, waiting for the next poet to descend and mistake his nature for theology. They always did. They always would. Pan boarded the troop ship in Boston Harbor, following the smell of young men packed too tight in holds designed for cargo. The Great War had taught humanity to move bodies across oceans with industrial efficiency. They'd forgotten that efficiency worked both ways. This was different from every plague he'd witnessed. Medieval villages had died in isolation, each community collapsing separately, fear spreading slowly as travelers carried tales between towns. But now humanity had built a nervous system for panic, arteries of steel and steam that could carry terror worldwide in weeks. He walked the trenches first, savoring what poison gas and mechanized slaughter had already prepared. These soldiers had learned a new kind of fear, not the clean terror of facing an enemy, but the grinding, inescapable dread of being meat-fed into machines. When the coughing started, when men began drowning in their own fluids, it felt almost merciful compared to what artillery had been doing. But the real feast came when they went home. Pan rode the railways, sailed the shipping lanes, followed soldiers as they dispersed to every corner of civilization. Each young man was a missionary carrying his gospel, and the good news was nowhere was safe. Not anymore. Distance meant nothing. Isolation was impossible. The world had connected itself so thoroughly that catastrophe could finally travel at the speed of modern commerce. In Philadelphia, he watched the Liberty Loan parade. Thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, celebrating war bonds while virus bloomed in lungs and throats. Officials had known the risk, and held the parade anyway because the war machine needed feeding and money mattered more than lives. Within days, the city's hospitals overflowed. Within weeks, mass graves. The mask mandates fascinated him. Humans papering over their faces, creating barriers between themselves and others, transforming every interaction into negotiation between safety and connection. Some complied, others rebelled, insisting freedom meant risking death. Either way, the social fabric tore, and in the tearing he found nourishment richer than the disease itself. Quarantine turned cities into archipelagos, each household an island. Families locked inside with their sick-watched neighbors do the same. Everyone alone together, everyone terrified and unable to help or be helped. The isolation was exquisite. Not the noble isolation of hermits seeking wisdom, but the forced separation of social creatures denied their nature. What stunned Pan was the scale. Medieval plagues had killed millions over years. This killed tens of millions in months, facilitated by everything modernity had built to conquer distance and time. The very tools humans had forged to master nature became nature's most efficient weapons. In a Kansas farmhouse, he watched a woman bury her entire family in the yard because the ground was too frozen and the undertakers too swamped. She worked alone, crying behind a gauze mask, digging graves for husband and children while the radio played cheerful music from distant studios, pretending normalcy still existed. In Mumbai, bodies piled in streets faster than cremation could process them. In Sydney, quarantine ships waited in harbour, visible from shore, people dying within sight of home they'd never reach. Everywhere the same new fear, the invisible enemy, the threat that looked like your neighbor, your lover, your child. Trust became luxury, touch became risk. Community dissolved into suspicious individuals, calculating danger in every human interaction. By 1920, it was over. 50 million dead, maybe more. The count was imprecise, overwhelmed by magnitude. The world had survived, was already forgetting, would call this an aberration rather than revelation. But Pan remembered. Humanity had built a machine that could distribute catastrophe globally, and they'd keep building, keep connecting, keep creating arteries that could carry his presence anywhere civilization touched. They thought they were conquering distance. They'd built him highways.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more. Share to help the channel grow.